Hello and welcome. I'm your host, author Ryan M. Oliver, and this is the Mighty Books Podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Mighty Books Podcast. Today with me, I have Mark Love. Mark Love lived for many years in the metropolitan Detroit area, where crime and corruption are always prevalent. A former freelance reporter, Love honed his writing skills covering features and hard news. He is the author of the Jamie Richmond romance mysteries, Devious, Vanishing Act, Fleeing Beauty, and his latest release, Chasing Favors, along with the novella Stealing Haven. His short story, Don't Mess with the Gods, was written with L. Nina Castle and included in the Magic and Mischief anthology. Love also writes the Jefferson Sheen mystery series, Y319, Your Turn to Die, and The Wayward Path. Love resides in West Michigan with his wife Kim. He enjoys a wide variety of music, books, travel, cooking, and exploring the great outdoors. Mark, how are you today?
Doing very well, Ryan. Pleasure to connect with you.
It is my pleasure as well. So I'm glad we got to connect and talk about all of your experiences here. So we're about to talk about some amazing amount of books here. What's the one book we're particularly talking about today?
Today we're going to talk about The Wayward Path. That's the third book in the Jefferson Shane mystery series.
Mhm.
That is about a squad of detectives that work for the Michigan State Police, and they investigate major case crimes in the metropolitan Detroit area. For those of you that may not be familiar with Detroit, the metro area covers more than 6 million square miles. There are over 5 million people that reside in that area and probably 30 million crazy stories.
Yeah. Only that many, huh? Only that many.
Just, well, and the number's probably growing every time. So
Well, I was gonna ask what the inspiration for your books are, but I imagine it's where you lived and what you experienced as a freelance writer, reporter.
absolutely.
Yeah,
When I was working as a reporter, one of the best things that happened to me was they assigned me a crime beat. And one of the newspapers that I worked in or worked for, they covered a lot of suburban, smaller cities in Oakland County, which is a pretty big territory in the metro area.
sure.
And so once a week, I would go into these different police stations in these different small communities, and I would go over the blotter and talk to the officer in charge of public relations or the captain or whoever it might be. And I'd ask them about some of the different cases that had been reported. Well, I started to see some patterns because I would go to one city and I would see like some home invasions. And then I would go to the next city a little bit to the west and I would see some more home invasions. And then I would go to the third city on my beat and I'd see some more. And I said, don't you guys talk to each other? Because if I'm just a journalist and I can see a pattern, I would think professionals should be able to do it too. And I was told by a couple of them that no, 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 we focus just on our community and we take care of ours. Well, that gave me the inspiration for the idea for this crew of detectives that would work for the state police, have official jurisdiction over this whole territory.
Right.
So some of the stories that came out of this were really part of what I discovered while I was working as a reporter. And it was just one of the things that led me to this current book, The Wayward Path. This one is about a cold case investigation. And I'd always been kind of intrigued with something like that because no matter how good the squad of detectives are, there's going to be some cases that just never get solved. And I had read a lot about different cold case investigations, and some of them that were very elaborate, and some of them that were just occasionally looked upon. And that gave me the inspiration to work on one. And so I started putting all of this together, and I did all of my research, and I wrote the story and polished it, and I submitted it to my publisher and was pleased that they accepted it.
Yeah.
And we were going through the editing process, and it was ready to come out. And I want to say it was like August of that year. And right about the time that we were going through the final edits, I saw notification from Western Michigan University, which is in the area that I live in now. And they had put together a squad of students that were investigating cold cases with the local police departments. And they were able to solve one that was like a 20-year-old homicide. And I went, oh my gosh, this is exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And my book is coming out like 2 weeks after this or whatever. So the timing was just phenomenal. And I thought this just it's like I planned this almost.
Almost. The stars aligned almost for that. That's
Absolutely.
that's eerily coincidental.
Yes, indeed.
You sure not some just devious villain here who's trying to sell books as an
Yeah, I've been accused of, some people will tell me, if you ever want to get rid of a body, you need to talk to Love because he probably knows best ways. And I said, this is all fiction. A lot of it is research, but the majority of it is things that come from my twisted imagination. And
right.
we just kind of run from there.
Uh-huh. And the all the experiences that you've dealt with and seen, and that will culminate quite nicely into a thick book of fiction as well.
Yes, indeed.
So okay, so you've got a huge plot line of books here. So I count one, two, three, four. Is it five? You're up to like eight or nine now. Is that what I'm ca
I,
counting to?
I have 8 books that are in print right now. I have a new book that I'm finalizing, and my editor and I are doing the happy dance, going back and forth, trying to get it fine-tuned. And
Yeah.
we're hoping, and this is a little different for me because this will be my first attempt at self-publishing or
Oh, okay.
independent publishing.
Yeah.
Because my 2 series are with traditional publishing houses. The Jamie Richmond series is with Inkspell Publishing,
Okay.
and the Jefferson Shane series is with the Wild Rose Press.
Oh, okay. Got you there. Neat,
And
Nate.
they're both really good houses to work with, and I've gotten a lot of support and everything. And I just have really been curious about trying to do one as an independent. And I had this old novel that was sitting on the shelf, and I wanted to have something new. And a good friend who was also a writer and editor kept poking me with like a sharp stick and saying, "You need to have something. Let me take this from you."
Yeah.
So I cleaned it up, and we are very pleased with where it's going, and it's hopefully will be done, like I said, 1st of June.
Yeah.
So
Oh, awesome. 1st of June. Very good. So I'm very interested to see when your self-publishing is complete and got about a year or two under your belt with to see like the results of traditional versus independent because I've talked to both and both have good and bad aspects to either. One, you have more control, 100% control, which means you also get 100% of the revenue, but it also means you have 100% of the work to do. That's where I live in.
yeah,
Tradition.
exactly right. And
Yeah,
and I've had conversations with a number of people that are self-published, and of course they always tell me, "Well, you should do this and you should do that." And I said, I work full time, guys, and I write when I can.
right,
And so I would rather spend my time writing than editing or promoting. Of course, you can't escape promoting. But the editing and the research and all this stuff, these are all parts of what I want to do, but I don't want to make that take over so much of my time,
right.
especially when my creative time is limited as it is. So
hmm So do you find you have more time when you're independent or when you're traditional?
I haven't quite figured that out yet. Uh, I'm hoping I'll see some of that results soon with where we're going.
Right.
Both of my traditional publishers are very supportive,
Good.
and they don't give me like, here's a deadline. I want you to have a new book ready by, you know, July 1st.
Right.
Um, Neither one of them is pushing. Now, once I submit a manuscript, if it's accepted, then that's a little different story. Then they say, okay, here's the deadline when we want to see the first round of edits. Here's when we want to see, we'll put you into the catalog and get you into the system so that we know when it's going. But as far as actually writing the original manuscript, they both are. kind enough to just stay hands off and say, whenever he's got something ready, he knows where to find us. So,
I think that's a good model though, because when you're writing your first draft, that is where it's all pieces and parts. You're still trying to figure out. It's kind of like when you got, you're building something and the first time through, it's just in your head completed, but they don't it doesn't show you the intimate details of how do I connect this to that? How does this move into slot in right here? If I do this engineering incorrectly, it completely screws up the whole project. So that manuscript is you could scrap half of it by the time you get through a decent amount. I've had to kill several chapters of my first book because of just how terrible it was written originally, or it just didn't fit the storyline. So to me, that's the most arduous and time consuming part of writing a book. When you have it down, you've got something on paper, you can work with something like that. It's a little more less time consuming.
yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Ryan. Absolutely. And I'm, some people tell me I'm crazy, but I don't work with an outline. I start with a character and a general idea of the story, and I'll just start writing scenes as they come to me. And it could be dialogue, it could be a scene or something like that. And a dear friend tells me that I'm like a police officer. Well, all I do is run around behind them and write the incident report. And I think that's priceless. And that's fairly accurate because many times I will have an idea of where I want the story to go, but in the process of writing a particular scene, all of a sudden I'll make a 90-degree turn and I have no idea where this came from.
Yeah,
But oh my gosh, it works so well. And then you look at it afterwards and go, wow, I have no idea, but it's working. So
I 100% agree. So like when I first started writing when I was a kid, I was like, teenager when I started writing mine. And I didn't have an outline. I didn't have anything. I just started going. I had like an event in my head. Events. I wanted to hit events. But I found as I got older, I needed to have at least a track to lay down. So I would make a outline, I mean, very loose outline. And it would be more like a dots on a map to go into a treasure map, to different events or different, and so I would do that. And when I'm writing, same with you though, like I want to go this way. I have a better idea. And I would either not, I had a character who I was just gonna kill as a, show of the villains, just how bad he was. And I was like, actually, it would be more interesting if he stayed alive and did it this way. And so I flipped it and it added more, I don't know, it added just some more interesting dynamic to the scene. And it just right off the cuff, that organic growth while you're writing it, A is awesomely fun and B sometimes more interesting.
oh, I absolutely agree. And I've had conversations with some family members and said, they start talking to me, well, why did this go this way? Where did you come up with this? And I said, my characters tell me what they want to do. They said, you make
Yeah.
them sound like they're real. I said, they're real to me, you know.
Here.
They are all up here, and they're up here running around and they get involved in things that I never really considered before. It's just part of where the story leads.
Yep. You kind of let instinct take over a little bit.
Exactly right.
Yeah, instinct will help out a lot. In fact, instincts helps policemen and I'm sure reporters as well. So
I stumbled upon some really good stories when I was working as a reporter, and as a freelancer or a stringer, I had a little bit more flexibility. So if I came upon an idea for something, I could reach out to one of the editors that I worked with and said, "Hey, I stumbled upon this. What do you think about that?" And they said, "Oh, well, we can have so." I said, "No, no, 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 no. I'm not going to give you all the details if you're going to hand it off to somebody else.
right.
This is my discovery. Let me
Hmm.
run with it." And they go, "Oh, okay."
Well, at
And
least they'll let you do that. I'll just
yeah,
steal
it
your
was
idea.
nice. It took some time to build that relationship where
Mm.
they were comfortable with that.
Well, yeah, you got to
And
prove to them that you are worth a darn. Just to, it's like, okay, well, he usually gives us good stuff and it's well cited, well sourced. Okay, cool. We'll run, and he can, meet deadlines when push comes to shove. We'll let him run with this until and see what he flushes out.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
that was very much the case with the newspapers. And of course, I had a very strict deadline with them as far as when I had to have, all of my columns or information turned in, and it even led to a couple of editorials, which was a lot of fun to do. So
Cool. Very cool. Very cool. Now, how long were you a freelance reporter for?
I did that for about 5 years,
Okay.
and I did that while I was also working full time. So that was like my side gig.
Dang.
And at one point, they approached me and they said, "We'd like you to cover the city council meetings for Birmingham, which was a large metropolitan city." And I said, "Yeah, okay, I can do that." And it was like I can't remember if it was one or twice a month that they would have these meetings. It was in the evening, so I said, okay, I can go after my day job, and I would cover the meetings and see what was going on. And some of them were pretty routine, pretty dull. Others got a little heated, and it all depended on what was going on. But I got to know the city council members pretty well.
Yeah.
And I happened to be there one night, and the agenda was short. They got through everything they needed, but then they had a call to the public. And there was about 20 people that were there in the audience, and they all wanted to get up and talk about the exact same thing.
Oh,
They wanted to have a stop sign at some intersection, and one person had pictures on a poster board and diagrams, and other people were counting the number of cars going by. And I could see everybody's eyes glazing over on the council because we had people that kept repeating what was being said. And I'm like, dude, we're getting here 11 o'clock at night, and I got to be at work at 6 in the morning, and we're still going. So I mentioned this in passing to my editor, and I said, this was just really ridiculous. I mean, you could have just said, I agree with Sam, and we move on.
right.
And so she challenged me to write an editorial and give them some suggestions. So I did. And I made the comment in there that the people on the city council are all professionals. They can digest your information faster than I could handle Lafayette, Coney Island, which is a big place in Detroit.
Yeah.
And I said, they're going to get it. There's no reason to keep beating it over and over again. Let's
No.
just say I agree with Sam and move on. I said, or you could be like the Supreme Court, where they don't care if you're in the middle of the greatest argument ever. But when the timer goes, you're done, you're out.
Right.
And so this is what I wrote. And I thought, I'm going to be first when I walk into the city council chambers the next time. Sure enough, I walk in, and of course, I never knew how many people read these articles or columns or whatnot.
Right.
And I go in, and the mayor calls the meeting to order, and she looks around the crowd, and there was a fair number of people in there again that night. And she goes, "But before we start, we are going to reinstitute a time limit on the call to the public.
Hmm.
And if you are going to reiterate something that has already been said, we would greatly appreciate it if you just said, I agree with what so and so said.
Yeah.
And our secretary is going to keep track of the time. You'll have a maximum of 5 minutes, and that's how it's going to roll from now forward." And then she calls the meeting to order with a gavel, and she looks over at me and she goes, in like a stage whisper. I'm like, yes, man, somebody read it. So it was really a lot of fun to have that going on.
Yeah.
And I got some great experience interviewing people. I picked up a lot of great writing skills. Dialogue was so important. And that's something that I've always tried to focus on with my work, is to make sure that I capture dialogue in a way that makes sense. Because when you're writing contemporary books like I do, many people don't speak in full sentences. They don't use proper grammar. And it can be distracting if everything is in a complete written sentence like that. I had the great opportunity many years ago to meet Elmore Leonard, the crime novelist that was in Metro Detroit. He's the fellow behind so many great books that went on to become movies like Get Shorty, Out of Touch, Out of Sight, things like this. And he was just a delight. And I happened to stumble upon him in a bookstore, and he had a new release, and I wanted to get an autographed copy. And I walked in expecting a crowd, and there was just him sitting at this little card table with a stack of books. So I bought a copy, he autographed it, and we got to talking a little bit, and he found out that I like to write. And this was a long time ago. I was not nearly publishing much other than some short stories.
Sure.
And so we're having a great conversation, and he's telling me if you can master dialogue and pay attention to how people talk and what they say, he said the rest is just going to click for you. It's going to go. And we're talking, and I'm feeling guilty taking up this guy's time because this was like one of my literary heroes. And a little old lady comes in to get him, and I start to step away. You hold up his hand. No, no, you wait. And he signs a book for her, talks to her for a minute, and he turns back to me. Now, where were we? And we kept going. So I had like a 30-minute conversation with him that was just incredible.
Like basically a master class from one of your literary heroes. Well,
Precisely.
that's just like a dream come true for
Oh yeah.
an author or a writer. Yeah, and dialogue is such a it's so fun. Like as when I was younger, I thought setting the scene was more important. And it is important, but you
Very
can
much
set the
so.
scene very few words and you can actually make it more rich by the dialogue of the characters pointing things out, mentioning something about the area, and like you said, making it more realistic. Because I've read many that's like, wow, it feels so clunky when you read it versus when
Yes.
we actually talk, it's a little more truncated.
One of the other things that I picked up on briefly in that conversation with him was, sometimes you got to have a little humor. You got to throw something in there to, poke fun at the situation or to diffuse some of the tension that's going on, especially when you're writing mysteries and crime novels and things like that, where it's very intense. And sometimes a little, a one-liner in there can throw it off. And it breaks the routine up a little bit and gives the reader a chance to go, oh yeah, these guys really are human,
Hmm.
that you're reading a story about.
Well, and
So,
also it adds a little layer of realism to it too, because if you talk to people, first responders, police, EMTs, and the like, they tend to have a pretty dark sense of humor.
oh yeah.
Because if they don't, it's kind of like I'd rather laugh than cry kind of a situation. Because what they deal with on a daily basis or weekly basis, however busy they are, is pretty tragic and awful and pretty grotesque. So having a kind of inappropriate comedic quality to your language, it saves your sanity a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it adds that level of realism that many people can relate to.
Hmm.
Like you say, there's, this kind of work, first responders, I give them so much credit. And
Oh yeah,
the fact that so many of their days or their hours on the job can be very dark, very depressing.
yeah.
And if you don't have some kind of sense of humor or some way to relieve some of that tension, I don't think that you would be long for that career.
No, and I think you become more of a danger to yourself and even others if you don't have a way to of self-expression, like you said, breaks the tension up. Because we can only bottle up so much. We can only bottle up so much before it blows up in very destructive ways. And
Yes,
you don't want to blow up while you are a policeman middle of a call or something. That can just end very, very badly, as I'm
yes.
sure we've seen in the past, unfortunately. All of your books, they're all set in Michigan.
Yes, that's right. Primarily in the Metro Detroit area,
Okay.
because it is a pretty large geographic location, and Metro Detroit has always had a history of crime, corruption. There's a lot of things. I know they're making great strides, and they're doing so well now. I mean, there's still a long way to go, but there's been progress made. But it's had a history that goes back to the 1920s, 1930s
Oh yeah.
when some of the big mob families were there. The Purple Gang was notorious in Metro Detroit. They ran in Detroit the bootlegging, and they did a
Yeah.
lot of gambling and prostitution and drugs and all of this stuff for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so this is an area that's got some great people and some great opportunities, but there's always a little bit on the dark side there.
I think most metropolitan areas definitely have an underbelly that's not so appealing.
Yes,
Yeah,
very true.
definitely. And I think it's Detroit has Michigan in general. That's car capital, yeah, at one point in time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Motown was the center for cars. You had Ford, GM, and Chrysler were all very, very big in the area. And so much of the workforce in metropolitan Detroit was either working directly for one of the automobile companies or for suppliers that were working with them for different components for that.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so that's where Motown became such a popular name. And that's actually the banner that I write under. I call it Motown Mysteries. And
Okay.
that's the name of my company, and that's what I do because, again, almost all my books take place in that area.
I mean, I imagine that the reason why you do that, you worked that area for a long time. You are from that area. You still live in Michigan, so it makes sense. Would you ever consider writing from different cities, or you're going to stay in Michigan?
I did set one, it's a novella in the Jamie series in South Haven, Michigan, which is a beautiful city. It's a little resort area right on the shore of Lake Michigan.
Hmm.
And I did a story that took place there, and I sent her on vacation with her best friend, and she gets involved in a little mischief, a mystery, and a little romance that goes on there.
Cool.
And I've looked at some of the different cities in the area, and I keep coming back to Detroit. But I have this idea in the back of my mind that I want to try and do where maybe part of the story takes place like in Lansing, which is our state capital, and then part of it could be done in the Metro Detroit area. Or maybe it starts in Detroit and it's a chase that goes across different larger cities or small ones.
Hmm.
So it's in the recesses of my mind. I'm not sure when that's going to come into play, but
Right.
it's something I wouldn't be surprised. It could be like, let's go on a AAA tour of Michigan and see what kind of adventure we can have
Heck yeah.
with a
I
little
mean,
crime, a little.
it'd be kind of cool if you use, maybe you have already, Michigan's history, especially like maybe the car history in your mystery, like an event happened, cold case or something, which I think you were kind of talking about, a cold case that happened in the earlier, industrial years, car manufacturing years, and then resurfaces with new technology or new interest. So different timelines. There's a couple of authors I've talked to who worked at two timelines, like one in like the what was like late 1800s, early 1900s, and then it sets another timeline of early 2000s. And so you're kind of like, as you're reading the book, everything's meshing together and you see what happened. It's kind of a challenge, but
Oh, that would be interesting to do. I've had some parts of some of the books where there is a little bit of a flashback or something
sure.
that happened, a few years before is now coming to life. Actually, in one of my earlier books, which is called Your Turn to Die, in this same series, it actually talks a bit and gets involved with prohibition alcohol.
Okay.
Because Detroit is right across the river from Windsor, Canada, which is home to a number of distilleries, including the Hiram Walker Canadian Club family.
Hmm.
And back in the days of Prohibition, people would either go by boat or in the wintertime, they would try and drive across the ice from Detroit into Windsor to pick up alcohol.
Just for a drink, huh? Dang.
Yes, indeed.
Just for a drink. I mean,
Money to be had. You're
money to be
thirsty, you
had.
got to go.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I'm not an expert at all in this stuff, but I know Prohibition, the moonshiners, moonshining, apparently the running of moonshine inspired or started something about NASCAR. I don't know if I think that's
I've heard something along those lines as well, that really was the trigger for it. I've never dug into it that deeply,
down there about.
but I wouldn't be a bit surprised because they had some very fast cars to transport all of that good product.
They were taking some serious risks, both legally and just behind the wheel in general. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah. Now, in your stories, do you reference like actual places in Michigan and in Detroit, like
Yes,
locations? Yeah.
yes. In each one of my books, I always try and use locations that people will identify with. It could be, there's a very famous restaurant in Metro Detroit called the Whitney, and it goes back over 100 years, and it
Yeah.
was the home of a lumber baron. I'll make reference to American Park, which is where the Detroit Tigers play, or
Oh,
Ford
okay.
Field, where the Lions play,
Gotcha.
or some of the other venues that are close by. There's a really beautiful park that's now owned by the state. It's called Belle Isle, and it sits in the middle of the Detroit River, and it's accessible by boat or by a small bridge.
Okay.
I've used that in a couple of the stories as well because it's to me, I think those locations are like a character in the book. It's part of the story itself.
Yeah, the city itself is in essence a character. So, I mean, I know I've read a lot of Michael Connolly stuff, and he uses LA as his primary
Yes.
source location setting, I guess, and he hits the right spots. And so when he always says that, and it's like almost act like an organism, it's ever changing, it's growing. Certain spots are good for people to live in, certain spots are a little more hoity-toity, rich, type area. And it's just every time he talks about and he references back to those locations, you kind of get a sense for that city and how it behaves and the people there. So it's always interesting, especially if you read multiple stories of one
Yeah,
person's work.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And Michael Connolly does a wonderful job with that. John Sanford does the same thing with
Okay.
the Lucas Davenport and the Virgil Flowers series that he
Okay.
has, because those are based in Minnesota primarily.
Oh, okay.
But some of them will digress and go into, I think he had one that was part of it was chase going into Ohio and New York when they were chasing after killers.
Interesting.
But those locations can really play a role in the story, and people can identify with them.
Oh, 100%. And I'm more like interested in, places that or books that are setting in your own hometown. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool. And so you just kind of resonate with that and people just get hooked. Like, oh, I've been to that restaurant. I've been to that on that street before. So it's just kind of neat to when you see that, identify it. It kind of
Yeah.
becomes a personal connection with the story.
Well, the main character in the Police Squad series is Jefferson Shane. And the backstory is that he was abandoned at birth and he was found at the intersection of Jefferson Avenue and Shane Street. And
Ah,
through a clerical error, instead of writing down baby Johnny Doe, it was written Jefferson Shane as the name of the child, and it stuck. I have had people identify with this immediately. I've had a friend that will actually, every time she goes to Detroit, she goes to that intersection and she will look for this character. And she's taken pictures of, I'm standing at the street sign where Jefferson Shane originates.
that's
And
cool.
it's really a nice way to make that connection.
I like that. That's very clever. That's very clever to do
Oh,
that.
thank you.
Yeah, I want that's wonderful. So, okay, so you have two series out?
That's right.
Okay,
I have
okay,
the two series. Jefferson Shane is about the squad of detectives
okay.
with the state police, and then Jamie Richmond. The Jamie character was another byproduct of my time as a journalist because I decided to make that character an investigative reporter for one of the newspapers.
Hmm.
And after she's done that for about 10 years and really gotten very good at investigations and her writing skills and building a huge catalog of contacts, she decides to pursue her passion of writing mysteries. Yet each time while she's working on a new book, perhaps doing the research or something, she comes upon an actual crime. And
Oh,
because
okay.
she is a very intelligent, very determined young lady, she will use her skills and her contacts to try and figure out who done it, who's behind the crime that's going on.
Interesting.
And along the way, she begins a romantic relationship with a fellow who is a state police trooper. So there's a little connection with the police department there.
Nice.
And I I had a friend when I first started writing that said to me, you need to put a little romance in your books. I said, I'm a guy. I don't know anything about romance. She said, yeah, but your last name is Love and you're writing fiction. So you can make it up. And so there is a little of that in the Jamie stories where there's a little romance that goes on.
Yeah, you gotta have just a touch. You can have a little bit,
Just a little bit.
just a
So
little bit, just enough to keep the interest, maybe for the more, lovey-dovey group of readers who want to see a little less action and more, like love affair. But
yeah.
yeah,
Well, it's a
interesting.
different kind of action. That's all.
Yeah, a different kind of action, depending on how hard you go into it, how deep you go into it. So do you want each individual book to stand alone? Like if I picked up your second novel of the Shane series, I picked that up, would I be able to understand everything going on, or do I have to read the first book to understand the second book?
Each one is written as a standalone novel, and I
Awesome.
work very closely with my publishers and the editors to make sure that I'm not leaving things out that would make somebody say that I have to go back and buy the first book and read that one in order to understand the relationships and the characters. Now, we want to make sure that each one is a standalone novel.
Gotcha.
Um, and
Mhm.
like many people, I will tell you, the more you write, the better you become. And so, like the writing, I'm not saying any of them are bad, of course, they're all great.
Yeah.
But the more recent ones, the newer ones, are going to be the writing could be just a little sharper, a little crisper to it.
Mhm.
Maybe there's a little more involvement in the dialogue itself, or something along those
Yeah.
lines. Because I,
Yeah.
I think, like anything else, the more you do it, the better you become.
Yep, 100%. What is it? Stone sharpens stone or something like that. Like I think it's man sharpens man or iron sharpens iron. But as you do things, you obviously get better at them. And I know I've from
Yes.
just from my own work, going from when I started now to now, writing is a lot more sharper now than it was. You just get used to, you understand and take into consideration how people, how we were talking about earlier with dialogue. You pick up the more pertinent facts versus or piece of information rather than really stringing things along and making it little, I don't know, overtly detailed. You don't need to necessarily do that. And my sister and I have been reading a lot of older books like 20s, 30s, 40s stuff, mysteries and different short stories and such like that. Actually, some 60s and 70s too, kind of a long gambit. We've noticed that with the earlier generations writing, very curt, very truncated. Like it's up to the reader to fill in the detailed gaps. And then as the newer writers I found for like fantasy and other things and fiction in general, a lot of detail sometimes gets put into things. So I don't know, maybe it's just a generational thing or it's just each person's interest, but I don't know. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that it could be a combination of things as you described, and especially I think the genre can have something to do with it too, because a lot
Totally.
of science fiction, there's a lot more descriptive that goes into it, especially when you're building worlds that not everybody's going
Mhm.
to be able to pick up right away and identify with.
Right.
So it's going to be a bit different with that.
Yeah. For so research. So I'm sure a lot of your research comes from as you were an investigative reporter, but for each book, are you diving hard onto research on a specific cases, or are you going on to more on like human behavior? Like what are you looking at when you're writing a mystery novel? What do you look for research?
I do a lot of research both online and through interviews. This particular book that we were talking about, The Wayward Path, the body of the young girl that was killed is found by a training exercise where they're using a human remains dog, or some people would call it a
Okay.
cadaver dog. And I actually met a lady that trains these dogs.
Hmm.
And it was just a chance meeting, and I found out what she did, and I hadn't started even thinking about this book yet. But when I met her, I said, can I interview you? I'll buy you coffee, I'll buy you lunch, I'll buy you dinner. Just let me pick your brain and get some specifics about this.
Yeah.
And she was more than happy to. So I sat
Oh
down
yeah.
with her and we started doing this, and I dug into it. I got a lot of good information that I could use in that story. Well, then as I kept going with the story, I said, I want this girl to be, she was a teenager. She disappeared from high school one day and just no trace, gone. And so her family's gone. There's nobody available 15 years after her disappearance. So I figured out, all right, well, I will have the cops interview the teachers that were at the school where she was at. So I'm going through and I'm figuring out, okay, math and English and whatever. And I'm like, well, one of the things missing is history. And I'm like, I need something with history. And it dawned on me, I've got a good old friend who is a Civil War nut. He's a fanatic. And so I reached out to him and I said, I want to, use this in the story. So we ended up doing a Zoom call for a couple of hours, went over and I sent him some of the script of what I was already writing. And he sent me back, no, no, this is wrong, fix this, do that. And I said, all right, out of curiosity, how many books on the Civil War do you have personally? He said, only 700. I said, only 700 books? He said, yes. My wife won't let me buy any more. She's afraid the house will collapse. So I had to, in the course of research, I got this, so I incorporated that into the story. But I've interviewed um, people from many different walks of life that have played a part in what I come up with. And sometimes, like with this young lady that trained the cadaver dogs or the human remain dogs,
Yeah.
I didn't have a story in mind that I was working on, but it was just too good to pass up. And I had that opportunity. I wanted to talk to her and find out more because everybody's knows something that's special to them. And I feel if I have that opportunity, I can talk to them and I can learn a little bit more about what their background is and what their interests are. Who knows? It's going to show up in one of my characters. You
Uh-huh.
know, I got to do it. So,
You got to take advantage of those opportunities because it's not always going to follow up on you right away. It's just not. It's
oh
just
yeah,
not.
and I think like many writers, you have to be observant. You have to pay attention to what's going on around you.
Hmm.
And I've had situations that have just I was just minding my own business, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I witnessed something that's going on. I'm like, I saw a little interaction between two people or a little dialogue, and I'm like, I can use that and
Hmm.
I'll put that to play in a story somewhere.
Oh
And
yeah.
it just who knows where it could lead. So
I have had many conversations or more passing by with friends and coworkers, and I'm like, that was a very odd conversation, or that was a very interesting interaction, or he said something that was kind of interesting. And I used to when I worked on the piers out here for the naval base, you can't have phones, you can't have your cell phone. So old school, I guess you'd say, always had a notebook in my pocket, regardless.
right.
Pull that thing out and I would just write down. And I'd come home and have crusty notes. You just work around salt water and dirty job and crusty notes on the desk, and I'm writing all that down. Few of those have made their way into stories, and it's like this is beautiful. This is just
Oh, absolutely.
hilarious.
You come upon something like that, you just can't pass it up.
You really can't. You really can't. I know I'm starting to now. I was a little more hesitant when I was younger, but I'm getting more comfortable with me throwing people my own stories. Like, hey, what do you think about this? So I'm using more alpha and beta readers nowadays than I used to. Are you heavy user of alpha and beta readers?
I have a small crew of beta readers that are very, very, very helpful.
Good.
I don't give them the manuscript until I've gone through it a couple of times and tried to
Sure.
make sure I've got it nice and clean. But I will turn to them and say, okay, here's the deal. This is, if I give it to you now, can I expect it back in like 3 weeks' time? Because then I want to be able to take your comments and suggestions, make it pretty, and then send it to my publisher as a submission. Because once I get past that point, I want to move on to the next project.
Yes.
And I have had some great insight from my beta readers. And one of them, a dear friend, Mary, who loves to read these stories, she was reading one of the Jamie Richmond early manuscripts. And I made some comment about she's getting ready to go on a date, and her best friend offers to style her hair a certain way. And Mary almost smacked me. And she said, you know nothing about women. And she's not going to, this is something like she was going to go to the gym and work out. This isn't the style you would use if you're going on a date night. Here, use this instead. And I'm like, thank you.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
great.
I don't know these things. And this is
Yeah,
this is why I turn to you for that. So
exactly. Well,
that kind
that's
of help
good.
is great. And when you've got a variety of people that are doing this, men and women that can give you reactions, and that's very, very helpful.
Oh, 100%. Again, it makes it more. Makes it more, what do you call it, realistic. So, what's some of the more challenging things about obstacles about publishing the books that you've come up, what you've dealt with in your actually, when did you start publishing books? You've got a huge array. When did you start publishing books?
I started, I want to say in 2014,
Oh, okay.
and I had dabbled with a couple of earlier publishers that were they were all excited about my book and everything else, and they did absolutely nothing with it to
Mm,
support. And originally, I had some success with some short stories, and I was looking to try and get with a traditional publisher. And at the time, a number of people were suggesting again the indie method, but I just didn't feel as confident with that. I didn't feel as comfortable because there was so much I don't know,
right.
and I wanted to try and stick with the traditional publisher. And so when I was able to connect with these two houses, with Inkspell and with the Wild Rose, it just really seemed like we clicked. Um, Melissa Keir, who is the brains behind Inkspell, has gotten to the point where the last manuscript that I submitted to her, I reached out to her and said, I've got this story. It's in the Jamie series. You know, this is roughly how long do you want me to go through the normal? I said, I'm just want to give you a heads up. I'll go through the normal submission process where I write a synopsis and, a sample chapters and all this stuff. But I just want to give you a heads up. This is, on the horizon, maybe next week.
Yeah,
She sends me back a note that just says, send me the manuscript. I'm like, okay, I don't have to go through that process. That's fine.
that's awesome.
I sent it to her, and in 24 hours, I got a contract from her. She said, I love this character. I love what you do with this whole crew, this whole story. Yes, here we go. 24 hours. I said, Stephen King, Michael Connolly, these guys get a contract in 24 hours. This is me. I'm
Yeah,
not accustomed to this.
yeah.
He said, no, no, I really like what you do, and I know this is going to be good. She says, I sat down and read the whole thing in one evening.
Mhm.
Wow, this is great. So then we went through the necessary process with editing and designing a good cover for it and everything else. And that turned out very well. And her next comment to me, so what's next? I'm like, no, I'm working on a couple others yet. She goes, well, I'm ready for the next Jamie book. As soon as you have it done, I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, that kind of, support and confirmation of my work is just priceless.
It
And
motivates the heck out of you too, that's for sure.
absolutely, it
Yeah.
just wants me to keep going. And of course, when I hear something like that, the ideas for the stories just keep on rolling. And I have to admit that the Jamie character, because all of my stories take place in the metropolitan Detroit area, and she's romantically involved with a guy who's a state trooper. And the Shane series is about Michigan State Police detectives, but they interact. And so the Jamie character has made sort of like a cameo appearance in the second and third Shane books. And I've had people say, "Oh, I really like this character." I said, "Well, then you had to step over here and look at this series because this is all about her." And it's just somebody said it's like I, she said cross pollination, but I think she just said it was something along those lines. I said, well, you're crossing the characters from one series to another. I said, there are authors that will do that. Maybe
Yeah.
they're not writing separate series, but the characters will interact going back and forth. So,
I think it's a very clever and kind of a fun way to connect your books to each other. I think that's a great methodology. So if you can make it
oh
work
yeah,
seamlessly, like it sounds like you did, why not?
I think it's worth a try. And somebody told me I should try and write one book with part of it from Jamie's perspective and then the other part from Shane's. I said, yeah, but I'm dealing with two different publishers. I don't see how that's going to work.
No,
Uh,
that would be challenging. Maybe if in the future you get rights from one to the other, but that just sounds too convoluted and weird. I don't mean, would you be interested in doing something like that?
I have not come up with a decent idea that
Okay.
where that would work.
Yeah.
I can see that the cameo appearances seems to work well,
Yeah.
and I would probably stick with that.
Yeah, I think
Because it
that
actually in the last Jamie book, which was called Chasing Favors, instead of having Shane make a cameo appearance in her book, I had a couple of the other detectives from his squad do
nice.
that. So it's like, okay, we're still crossing, from one to the other, but these are good characters. I mean, I get a lot of good feedback from them, and I can't leave them alone for too long, or they'll get
No.
bored. I want to keep them busy.
Yeah, yeah, you want to. Now, I'm curious because I'm an indie author and I've always been interested or curious about the traditional publishing. When it comes to like a contract, what exactly are we under what are you under contract for? Just amount of time? Is it how long you're going to get a manuscript to them? I mean, what you have to go too detailed, but can you talk on that for a
Usually,
second?
yeah, sure. Usually what have is I reach out to them when I have the full manuscript ready.
Right.
And then I will offer it to them. Both have, as part of the original contracts before, they have what's known as the first right of refusal, especially when I'm writing a series.
Mm,
So they can see that. And if it's something that does not appeal to them, they can reject it. And then
okay.
I'm free to either do it independently or take it to a different publishing house.
Okay.
So there's that involved. Normally on a contract, it's good for 7 years that they have the rights to publish it. And they will assist with marketing, with the editing, with the artwork for the cover, with any um, anthologies that they may want to put together or packets that they
Right.
may want to do, something along those lines. And of course, there are some guidelines that I have to adhere to where I can't be disparaging about them. And, if there was some reason that I would want to, and usually with a contract, there is an escape clause where if I say I'd like to cancel my contracts with you and I will recover full rights for all of my manuscripts. And, that's been the case.
Okay.
But with these two houses, with Wild Rose Press and with Inkspell Publishing, I'm very happy with both houses, and they do a lot. Both have got a larger uh, catalog, a large family or a house of authors.
Yeah.
Both are international. Uh, Wild Rose does a little bit more on the straight mysteries and a lot of different things in addition to romance, and they could have science fiction as well. So a little variety there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so for marketing, because I know from as an indie author, and I've heard from traditionals too, is really the author is really the marketer of your book. Do the traditional publishing houses do much for marketing for your books?
They do some to assist. They'll, whether it's on their websites or at events that they're doing or with social media, they'll also help to promote some of that. A lot of that falls back to the authors themselves. So I do a fair amount on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And one of the biggest things that I've been told that I do well that some authors are reluctant to do, I do a lot of in-person events.
Mm,
I mentioned earlier, I'm coming up to the festival season. That's what we call it here in Michigan, where there's going to be a lot of art shows. There's going to be a lot
nice.
of different festivals of one form or another. I know I'm signed up for about 12 different ones between now and the middle of September.
Great.
And so I'm going to be on the road going to different communities, and I'll have my booth set up and I'll have all my books on display. And I actually had somebody ask me one time, how much do you charge for an autograph? I'm like, if you buy my book, I'm going to autograph it for free. I'll dedicate it to whoever you want.
Yeah.
And, I don't charge for the autograph. I just charge it for the book.
Yeah.
But I've had slowly, I'm developing a following of some people that will
Good.
see me at one event and show up at another one. They'll buy one of like the first book in one series, and all of a sudden I look up and I go, "You look very familiar to me." And they'll say, "Oh, I met you here," and I'm like, "Oh, that's right, yeah." They said, "I want to get the next book in the series." And last summer, I had a young lady that followed me to three different events, and she bought all five of the Jamie Richmond books. And she said, "You need to work on more of these because I really like them." I'm like, okay, I'll add that to my notes. But yeah, I said, that's just so remarkable and so rewarding to hear that somebody that really enjoys your stories, that they connect with you and then they track you down. I said, "Huh, this is like, you can be the president of my fan club. This would be great. But you got to start the fan club, you know?"
Uh-huh. That's yeah, the in-person thing I love that. I have not been able to do it as many as I'd like to as I have done. First got mine out during COVID, so we were kind of crunched down for a
Yes.
bit. And so then with a young family, it's kind of hard to move around and do a lot of them. But as they're getting older, I'd love to go do more because it's fun. You get to connect with the people there, and usually you're with other, at least from the ones I've done, other authors we were there, so we get to connect and chit chat and just interface together, which is really fun also.
Oh,
But
yes.
yeah, but one of the authors that I've interviewed actually, he is a local in Kitsap County, yeah, Gig Harbor primarily, but he's known as the Lincoln guy, and because he writes historical fiction on Lincoln and actually very detailed, very good. But he is known all around because he does every live event. He mans it as many as possible, and people have come up and bought multiples because they've enjoyed his stuff, just like you. They recognize him and becomes a
Oh,
staple of
yeah.
the community. So
That's really that's a big thing to do if you're able to do the in-person events. And I have seen an increase not just in the print books that I sell at these, but also in the e-books. And
right,
I have a couple of the Shane books are also available in audio, and those have gone up as well. Because some people will say, "Well, I only read on my Kindle or
right.
I listen to." Hey, great! Here's another opportunity for you, and they discover somebody new.
Mhm.
And I try and encourage people, if you have the opportunity, talk to authors. I like to go whenever I'm doing these events. I'll find other authors that are there, and I like to walk around before we get started and say, okay, if I haven't already met you, tell me a little bit about what genre that you write. Tell me a little bit about your books. Because chances are, if it's busy and a crowd's coming by, somebody will say, well, I'm not interested in mysteries. I'm looking for historical fiction. Great. Go over and talk to Sam. He's right over here. Or somebody says,
Yeah,
I'm looking for true crime. You got to go over there and talk to Joyce. She's on to that
yeah.
and drive people, to if somebody's only does nonfiction or somebody does, horror stories, whatever. We want to, I don't see it as a competition.
No.
I see it more as a collaboration when we're doing these kind of events.
I love that because we did the same thing. We had a booth about 10 of us, and there was a variety of historical fiction. We had a baseball book guy, we had myself who does fantasy, we have all sorts of stuff, and one was doing gardening. And so it was like, okay, well, what do you like? Oh, I like doing this. Well, if you talk to her over there, she has a book from here, really well done. And most of us have actually read each other's stuff, which was kind of cool. So, and which it was just so nice. And I personally think that when you're helping other people out, it's karma. I mean, if I'm gonna help you out with something because it's the right thing to do, you deserve the praise. Eventually, somewhere down the line, the universe is gonna go, well, they're directing people to you now because you've helped help them out
Yeah,
as
you're paying it forward, and that's a great
yeah.
approach to take. And there are some authors that every time we're at an event, we'll kind of look over each other and just, hey, okay, I know you're here. I know what you got,
Yeah.
and as you say, many of us will read each other's work, and so we're familiar with it as well, and we can
Mhm.
talk it up a little bit too.
Yep, I love doing that. That's one reason why I do the podcast is because I can promote others who have written good stuff or who are brand spanking new and have never even done interviews or now they have something to take with them to promote them and there's actual good dialogue because a lot of the authors I talk to are introverts who don't like to speak about themselves. And so this is a good opportunity for them to speak about themselves in a fairly open and calm, comfortable manner. And so they can use that to help market because marketing is very saturated. It's so hard to break out,
Oh,
especially in social media and Amazon. And if you can go to a live event and you can go, hey, maybe sample the book and say, hey, I've got this and this. There's even an interview if you want to listen to that. Um, it's just helping each other out seems to be the best model.
yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And you're very right about many authors are introverted. I know a young lady that's a wonderful poet, and she's working on things constantly. And I keep telling her, you need to put together a chapbook or two.
Hmm.
And if you want to self-publish it or take it to a local house or whatever, but then you need to start getting out. And she gave me this look like she was terrified of that concept. And I said, you have wonderful things to share. You just gotta, do this. And she said, but this is not me. And I said, when I'm doing this stuff, this is not me either. I'm normally a very shy, quiet person. I know most people are going to laugh if they hear me say this. And I teach at a local college, so I'm in front of students all the time.
Yeah,
And basically, I say it's like performing. When I do some of these events, you're on stage. You have to be very upbeat. You have to be very positive. You have to engage with people as they're going by. Make a comment about, oh, I like that hat, or hey, what the case may be. I have a friend that says I'm absolutely shameless because the Jamie character is a redhead, and every time a young lady walks by my booth that's got red hair, I will stop her because four of the five covers picture a redhead, and I'll ask her if she
that's
modeled for one of the covers. And sure enough, somebody says, one of these times you're going to get slapped. I said, okay,
yeah.
but if I make a sale at the same time, I had a young lady that I did this with last summer, and I asked her if she modeled for the cover, and she blushed and she smiled at me and she said, I said, well, you could always tell one of your friends that you know, modeled for this character, this book. And I tell her a little bit about Jamie, the character, and she said, hmm. I said, I know where you're going. Yes, you could say you were the inspiration for that character. And she bought a copy. She goes, I'm going to do that because I have some very gullible friends. I'm going to tell them that not only did I model for it, but I'm the inspiration for this character. And I said,
That
made a
is
sale, you know,
brilliant. Whatever works, whatever works.
absolutely, you know.
That is absolutely brilliant. I absolutely love that. So, where can people actually purchase your books now? In-person live events, online, where can they buy them?
These books are available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple Books as well. Basically, all the ebooks at all your prime spots. My website has links to these as well. As I said, my company is Motown Mysteries, and that's my website, motownmysteries.com.
Awesome.
And I also keep on there a list of upcoming events as to where I'm going to be because I like to get out and meet people, talk about my books, and see where I'm going to be at. So I'm going to be in a lot of different cities all around West Michigan this year. Starting with the end of April, I'm going to be at a maple syrup festival, which is going to be kind of wild. It's the first time I've been there, but I've heard from some other authors that have participated that it's in a little town called Vermontville, and it's one of the biggest deals of the year to go there. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Really?
And, and then there's a number of other festivals. I'm going to be at a strawberry festival. There's some art shows that I'm going to be participating in, and some of them get a little curious because they say, "Well, you're not really an artist," and I said, "Well, I have word art, and there's art on the covers if you like. I'm not selling jewelry or paintings or anything like this, but it's something different." And the facilitators or the people that are putting these shows together, they like to have that variety. So they have, yes, they have photographers and painters and sculptors, but then they also have authors that are part of
Mhm.
this. And it's still a creative process. It's still something different.
Yes, it is. We are actually our art festival we have out here has a huge amount of authors that come by. So it's
Oh, that's
Definitely
great.
very, it's a popular genre of art, us wordsmiths.
Yes, indeed.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming on today and chatting me about your books. It was very interesting and fun to talk with you.
Ryan, it's been my pleasure, and I wish you the best of luck with your writing efforts as well. And thank you so much for having this podcast available.
Thank you. And I always like to invite people back. So when you have some more books out or another year or so, if you want to come back and chat again, I'd love to interview and just catch up because why not?
That sounds like a great idea. I'll put it on my calendar.
All right, fabulous. All right, guys, go get some wonderful mysteries. I hope you really enjoyed this conversation. Like I said, go support his work, follow his all of his online socials, go onto his website, pick up some wonderful mysteries, and just dive in and enjoy them. Support a wonderful mystery author. I hope you guys really enjoyed this once again. And as always, stay mighty and keep reading.